Beyond Reason Radio.
Yes, this is finally another edition of Beyond Reason Radio. I am your voice of reason, of course, in a world that is beyond reason. I usually am your voice of reason 5 days a week on PM Orlando on WFLA, but now we're going to do Beyond Reason Radio. We're going to get into stuff that really is beyond reason, and we're going to have more of an in-depth analysis on, what's going on in the world, and we'll have some fun along the way. If you want to text, you can text live into the show right now at 23680. And once again, staying up late with me because he loves me so much. Hey, not supposed to laugh at that hard.
I'm sorry, I do. Yes. That's right. You did give me a 20.
It is Tom Benson once again producing for Beyond Reason. How are you, Tom?
I am fine. We are this close to the weekend.
Yeah, you would have been there already if it weren't for me.
I know. That's all right.
I just totally ruined it. We only do this once a week now. Once a week, Beyond Reason. There was a time where we were doing it like 3 times a week. So, but I got busy doing other things. So, what are we going to talk about? There's just nothing going on, right?
Then good night.
Good. Now we'll play some music. Yeah, that would go over well. Okay, here are the big topics that are going to be on Beyond Reason Radio tonight. We're going to start with health care. All of a sudden, health care is a debate again in Congress and the Trump administration, in our country as a whole, and even on the state level. I talked a little bit about that earlier on PM Orlando. You can catch the podcast, but I want to get deeper into that issue. I even had a Facebook post and a blog post on it. If you want to see the blog post, just go to WFLAorlando.com, click on the PM Orlando tab, or just I posted on Twitter as well, so you can follow me on Twitter at PMOWFLA. But one thing that I really want to get into today is healthcare, because all of a sudden it's a debate again. And what's really amazing about the whole healthcare debate, the whole thing going on with what Trump is doing, is because if Obamacare was so successful, I was just thinking about this the other day, and I think someone else pointed this out. If Obamacare was so successful and was such a great law, and the Republicans wanting to touch it at all is such a bad thing, then why are the Democrats pushing for Medicare for all? Why are they doing that? Why do we need Medicare for all if health care right now is so great because of Obamacare? If Obamacare was the thing that was Obama's crowning achievement, it's done so good for so many people. If it's so great, why do we need Medicare for all? I don't really understand that. So we're going to get in the whole issue. The reason why it's an issue is because the Trump administration came out today and basically the Justice Department basically said usually it's their job to defend a current law. But they basically said they agreed with some of the lawsuits because without the individual mandate, which has been reduced to 0 in the new tax law, they're basically saying the whole law is unconstitutional. So this brought up the whole debate again, and now there's a big split on it. Now, President Trump earlier today, and I have some audio of this, I believe, up there, Tom Benson. Trump earlier today was talking about how he's going to make health care. The Republican Party is going to be the party of health care. A little recap of what he said. Here it is.
Obamacare is a disaster. Right now it's losing in court. Right now in the Texas court, as you know, probably ends up in the Supreme Court. But we're doing something that is going to be much less expensive than Obamacare for the people. We're going to have pre-existing conditions, and we'll have a much lower deductible. So, and I've been saying it, the Republicans are going to end up being the party of health care.
All right, so this has already been bringing up a big debate within even the Democrat Party, because the Democrat Party doesn't quite know what they want to do with this, believe it or not, because as I said, you have a lot of the Democrats pushing Medicare for all. But all of a sudden now they have to defend Obamacare because Trump is attacking Obamacare. But as I said, why, if Obamacare is so great, then why are you pushing for Medicare for all? Because Obamacare was not great. The reason Obamacare, the Democrats pushing for Medicare for all is proof that Obamacare failed. Doesn't anyone else realize that? Obamacare was a big failure, and the Democrats are basically proving it every day. Why? Because they constantly complain about the costs of health care. Wait a minute. I thought Obamacare was called the Affordable Care Act. It was meant to cut costs. Yet every day you have Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, and others on the campaign stump saying they're going to reduce health care costs and they're going to do it with a Medicare for all plan. Well, why do we need it? I thought we already fixed it. I thought Obama did it. He had his 2,000-page, 3,000-page law with all his regulations, and it was all going to be fine and dandy.
And we read it after we voted for
it. Yeah. They knew from the beginning that Obamacare was not going to work the way it was supposed to. Obamacare was always meant to be a stepping stone to single payer. Always. People like me, when I was just a young guy just starting out in radio, people like me were saying, Obamacare, the Democrats are going to come out. They're going to say Obamacare doesn't go far enough. We need more, but this gets us in the door. Is that not exactly what happened? It wasn't, the hardest thing to predict, but that's what happened. Obamacare wasn't enough, but it got us in the door, and now we need to go further to Medicare for all. But there still is a debate within the Democrat Party because the idea of abolishing private insurance in this company isn't necessarily popular with all Americans. But Bernie Sanders running for president, I have some audio here of him. He is still pushing the idea that we just need to abolish private insurance. This is what he said.
Because ultimately we have to recognize that the current system is incredibly dysfunctional and wasteful. Its goal is to make profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies. You are not going to be able in the long run to have cost-effective, universal health care unless you change the system, unless you get rid of the insurance companies, unless you stand up to the greed of the drug companies and lower prescription drug costs. That's the only way that you could provide quality care to all people. I look at health care, Chris, the same way as I look at public education, the same way I look at police protection, fire protection. All people get it regardless of their income. It is publicly funded. That is the most cost-effective way to provide health care.
Karl Marx is clapping from the other side right now with what Bernie Sanders was saying there. One thing that I found that was really interesting about what he said there is he said, I look at this like I look at public education. Oh, does that mean Bernie Sanders is calling for the abolishment of private education in this country? I mean, he's calling for the abolishment of health insurance. Does that mean, well, public education will take care of everyone, so we should just get rid of private education? You think he's calling for that?
Get rid of all the private universities, too.
Yeah, get rid of all the private universities, get rid of all the private grade schools, all of that. What? Because we have to change the system if it's going to have to work. But there is actually a split within the Democrat Party, and this is something I've been worried about for a little while. There's this guy named Buttigieg who is running for president. He's a mayor right now, only a mayor of like 100,000 people. But he's running for president, and he's actually gaining some popularity in the polls. Now, the main reason he's gaining popularity is he's trying to seem like the smarter, reasonable Democrat. And this is a smart move, but I have a warning about people like him, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But he was on Fox News Sunday a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about healthcare, and he doesn't necessarily agree with the Kamala Harris, the Bernie Sanders of the world when it comes to healthcare. This is what he said.
Well, I do believe that a single-payer environment is probably the right answer in the long term. But I think any politician who throws around phrases like Medicare for all has a responsibility to explain how we would get there. In my view, what you want to do is you take something like Medicare, you put it on the exchanges as a kind of public option, and if people like me are right that that is both good coverage and more cost-efficient, then more and more people will buy in, and it'll be a very natural glide path toward a single-payer environment.
Was Kamala Harris wrong when she talked about just eliminating private insurance?
Yeah, I view it differently. I mean, think about Medicare itself. You still have Medicare Advantage and plans around that. Even countries like the UK with nationalized medicine still have a role for the private sector. So I think there will be a role for the private sector, but a very different one than we have in the corporate system today.
So he's coming out and he's kind of trying to take this middle-of-the-road approach where he's saying, yes, what we need is a Medicare for all, kind of like we have Medicare now, but there would still be a role for the private sector. See, when you get Medicare now, believe it or not, Medicare usually doesn't cover enough for most people. So they have to buy a supplemental insurance plan on top of that. This is what happens in some of the European countries as well. They have to buy supplemental insurance. So you get to pay higher taxes to cover the government insurance, and then you get to pay more for a private insurance on top of it. Isn't that a great idea? Can't wait to do that. That'll just cut costs for us. Oh, boy. But the reason why this is actually kind of dangerous is something I've been worried about lately. So many of the Democrats are going so far to the left that people like Buttigieg are going to come out and they're going to seem reasonable. They're going to push a Medicare for all that's more like a public option. And a lot of people are going to be like, well, that's a lot better than what Bernie Sanders was saying. Here's the problem, though. His compromise, because what he's talking about is kind of a compromise. His compromise is still terrible. His compromise is still awful. His compromise, and he kind of admits it there, his compromise is still taking us down the road of single payer, just kind of slower. So there's actually a point to be made that what Buttigieg is doing is more dangerous. And I've noticed this from the Democrats lately because Nancy Pelosi has been trying this week. Nancy Pelosi put out a plan this week that calls for sort of a expansion of Obamacare, basically. Kind of a compromise. She also did that with climate change. She has a climate change proposal that's not quite as radical as the Green New Deal, but it has some things to get us in that direction. And people are going to say, well, that's reasonable, right? No, it's just that the Democrats are so radical that their reasonable compromise seems reasonable, even though it's really not. Now, in terms of healthcare, there was an interesting piece in the Washington Post by Catherine Rampell that I had to comment on. Here's the title. You'll love this, Tom Benson. If the GOP built their ideal healthcare system, it would be Obamacare. She's arguing that the GOP, the Republicans, should just love Obamacare.
So in other words, come up with the same plan, just call it something else.
Kind of, yes. Yeah. But this kind of goes down the line of what I said. Obamacare, because the Democrats are so radical now, Obamacare seems like the reasonable compromise. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. Now, she also makes this basic argument that Obamacare really was built on market forces. Obamacare is actually kind of a free market system. Did you know that, Tom Benson? That Obamacare is this great free market system now?
Seems to be, yes.
Here is the problem with that kind of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It was not. It had the appearance of capitalism on top of it. It had the appearance of competition, the appearance of market forces by creating exchanges. But it's not built on that. It's not based on that. Now, the most obvious reason why it's anti-free market is the individual mandate. Forcing you to buy something that maybe against your will is not free market principles. I'm sorry. And I know the Heritage Foundation used to support it back in the 80s. It's not free market principles. But the biggest problem was, even though it had this perception of freedom around it with the exchanges, it's not free market principles, because you know what was added on top of it? 2,300 pages of laws that included all these mandates and regulations that basically limited what the insurance companies could offer. So you have these different plans, but they can't offer, the insurance companies can't really give you options. Mm-hmm. Because of all these rules and regulations. By the way, if you include all the regulations that were added later, because it gives the HHS, the Health and Human Services Secretary, a lot of power to do that. Over 20,000 pages of regulations added to Obamacare since it's been passed. 20,000. That's the free market right there. And of course, it added a Medicaid expansion. It didn't help the market. It polluted it with all of this stuff. Now, the biggest problem with Obamacare, in my opinion, Charles Krauthammer said this a couple of years ago before he died, is it fundamentally changed the relationship between the government, the individual, and their health care. Now, health care is seen as a right that is guaranteed by the government in some way. Obamacare got us down that road. It was never going to be good enough. It was always a stepping stone towards single payer, but it got us down that road. Now, President Trump was on the right track. What he did, earlier in his administration is he implemented a new rule that lets more organizations group together, even across state lines. They could group together and buy insurance plans as a group. Well, of course, they found some judge to strike that down this week. So an ideal plan, unlike what she says in this piece, would be a plan that offers more choices, more free market principles, more options. Obamacare did the opposite of that, even though it kind of made it seem like it was there. So this debate's going to continue. I liked Rand Paul's plan initially, but I don't know. It seems like the Republicans are kind of caving on some of this stuff, and we're going to get the compromise that is still really, really bad. All right, we have a lot more to get to. Reaction to the Mueller report. Adam Schiff got on his high horse, his pencil neck high horse this week, reacting to Republicans calling for him to resign from the Intelligence Committee. We're going to get to that and much more. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
Not only am I telling you the difference between right and wrong, but I'm also predicting the future. Yes, that is right. That conscience in your ear, that sounds a little bit like Yaffee, actually predicts the future as well. Remember earlier this week, if you were listening to PM Orlando or actually listening to me host Good Morning Orlando on Monday, I predicted that there would be a new buzzword floating around having to do with the Mueller probe because the Mueller investigation's done. It said there was no collusion. They can no longer keep saying collusion because the American people are not going to buy it. I know some in the Democrat Party on the left are still trying to keep it alive, but if you're the average American and you're not really paying attention to this stuff every day, all you saw was the headline that Mueller concludes there was no collusion, and you're going to move on. You're going to say, okay, enough. So they're trying to kind of shift the narrative a little bit here. I don't think it's going to work, but the new buzzword was said earlier this week. Here's a little montage. This is Tom Perez, DNC chair, and Adam Schiff of the intelligence community saying this word.
The question for me that remains is, was he compromised? Why did he say that he believes Putin over the intelligence community?
We need to be able to see any evidence that this president or people around him may be compromised by a foreign power.
There's that word, compromised. I told you all to listen to this word. This is another Yaffee I told you so segment here because I heard it once again today from somebody else on the left. I'm telling you, this is going to be spread all around in the next few weeks. Even after we get the full Mueller report, they're going to say, well, it wasn't collusion, but he might have been compromised by the Russians. So every now and then I'll listen to this podcast by the New York Times. It's called The Argument, where they have somebody who's kind of in the middle, someone who's kind of in the right, and someone who's on the left. Now, the person who's kind of in the right is still much more liberal than I am, of course. It's the New York Times. But Michelle Goldberg's on that show, and she's the leftist on that show. And I was listening to the latest one because they were talking about the Mueller probe earlier this week on the show, The Argument. And I noticed a word that she said today in her argument. It's got to be familiar. Here it is.
So even a lot of the kind of maximalist versions of the Russiagate story, which are not just that Trump was actively collaborating, but that he was, the other version of that is that he was sort of compromised and being manipulated. And even that version, that he's compromised and being manipulated, nothing in the Barr letter rules that out at all.
She almost wanted, she sounded like she was going to cry or something. But still, he's still bad, and we need to get rid of him because of compromise. Trump was compromised. Nothing in the Barr letter rules out that he was compromised, Tom Benson.
They want to keep this going until the Mueller report comes out because they're hoping there's some nugget in there.
Yeah, they're going to try to find anything. Yeah, and the other thing they're trying to say is there's a cover-up now. Like, no, the American people are not going to buy that. I'm sorry. You're going to get your base maybe to buy that because you want to believe it so badly. But the idea that the Justice Department is covering up what the Mueller report actually says and Mueller's just going to stay silent on it, come on. And they're going to go down the obstruction road, but Nancy Pelosi already knows it's a dead end because you can't say a president obstructed justice when he does his normal constitutional duties as president. You just can't say. I mean, even Comey came out earlier this week and was talking about, oh, I think he obstructed justice when he fired me. Well, I'm glad you're done with the investigation because you don't know how this works. But so another thing that happened earlier this week, because we all know the director or the chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the House of Representatives, Adam Schiff, Democrat from California. Well, earlier this week, and I talked about this on PM Orlando, the Republicans sent him a letter calling him to resign. And during one of the meetings, they all basically spoke saying, you need to get out of here. Because he was basically on CNN and other outlets camping out outside of him, couldn't wait to get in with the Jake Tappers of the world and say collusion, 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 collusion. You know, it's like a song, collusion, which is one word, I guess, I don't know. But and there you go. And they're saying, look, what you did was irresponsible. You need to resign. So Adam Schiff had this big speech, you know, after all this was happening. And I wanted to go through it a little bit because it's very instructive. He tries to get on his magnanimous high horse. He just seems so slimy to me. Am I the only one who thinks that? He seems slimy. He is like, he's like the typical bad guy in an action movie. Does anyone else like feel that when you hear Adam Schiff? I don't know. But he went on his speech, and there was something I was thinking about this, and I want to react to it. This is what he said.
My colleagues may think it's okay that the Russians offered dirt on a Democratic candidate for president as part of what was described as the Russian government's effort to help the Trump campaign. You might think that's okay. My colleagues might think it's okay that when that was offered to the son of the president, who had a pivotal role in the campaign, that the president's son did not call the FBI. He did not adamantly refuse that foreign help. No, instead, that son said that he would love the help of the Russians. You might think it's okay that the president himself called on Russia to hack his opponent's emails if they were listening. You might think it's okay that later that day, in fact, the Russians attempted to hack a server affiliated with that campaign. I don't think that's okay. You might say that's all okay. You might say that's just what you need to do to win. But I don't think it's okay. I think it's immoral. I think it's unethical. I think it's unpatriotic. And yes, I think it's corrupt and evidence of collusion.
So I was thinking about this. Basically what he says there is that, well, the Trump administration wanted to get some dirt on Hillary Clinton. Oh, okay. How did all this start in the beginning? Where did the dossier come from? Remember, this all started with the dossier.
Trying to look for some dirt on, what was his name? Oh, yeah, Trump.
Exactly. And who put together this dossier, Tom Benson?
Some foreign guy. Some guy from England,
Christopher
right?
Steele.
Yeah.
And what were his sources in putting together a lot of this dossier? The Russians.
Ah.
So you have Hillary Clinton, and my point is trying to get the worst that they have is stuff that was already public knowledge. That Donald Trump Jr., who's kind of an amateur at all this, got an email saying, hey, we have some dirt on Hillary Clinton. You want it? And he said yes. And nothing even came out of it.
It was a 20-minute meeting. They left because there was nothing there.
Yeah. And some people had contact with Russians, which happens in, you know how most campaigns, they have contacts with foreign dignitaries if they want to be president. This is not unusual. But so he thinks that that's all corrupt. And a lot of it is dirty politics. I agree. But this stuff has been going on for years. It's not just started with Trump. And all of a sudden now it's corrupt. He doesn't care that Hillary Clinton and her campaign helped pay for a dossier through Fusion GPS that got material from Russia. Doesn't care about what Hillary Clinton was doing with the Ukrainians. Doesn't care what Hillary Clinton did with her Clinton Foundation, which was corrupt as hell. Oh, he doesn't care about that. Now, all of a sudden, he cares because there were some people in the Trump campaign that wanted to get dirt on the opponent, which happens all the time. Give it a rest, Adam Schiff. The fact is, you went on CNN for 2 years saying that you had all this evidence of collusion, The only thing you ever had was stuff that was already public knowledge, but you made it seem like you had all this extra information, which you did not. You did it all for partisan politics and to get attention for yourself, and you got caught. You got caught. So it's time to go away. Don't act like you're all of a sudden above it all, because I don't remember hearing from you any of this when it comes to any Democrat doing basically the same thing. All right, we have a lot more to get to in the show. I want to talk about this guy, Buttigieg, who is actually doing a lot better in the polls. We're going to get to that. AOC is up to something very, very sneaky. We're going to get to that as well. And maybe if we have time, we'll do something that made Yaffee Laffee. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you heart Beyond Reason Radio, listen to the Beyond Reason Radio podcast on iHeartRadio. Just download the iHeartRadio app and search Beyond Reason Radio. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
So there's still a lot of speculation when it comes to the Democrats and their 2020 candidate, and that's because there's 80,000 people running in the Democrat side, so it's hard to tell who's going to win. But I've noticed there seems to be somewhat of a consensus on most commentators I see out there think it's either going to be Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. There are some out there who are thinking it might be Beto O'Rourke. I'm not sure it's going to be any of them, honestly. Really, none of these Democrats impress me, but I have a feeling when Kamala Harris gets on the stump more and she's in the debates, people are going to be like, okay, you're not that smart. When Joe Biden gets in, who knows what he's going to say that could ruin things. And plus, he's an old white guy, so, that can't work. And then there's Beto O'Rourke, who is just not impressive. I just can't imagine when people actually hear him speak about things more, especially in the debates, that he's going to be somewhat impressive. I'm more worried about Elizabeth Warren, even though Elizabeth Warren is fundamentally unlikable. I'm also worried a little bit. I'm not sure he's going to be the winner or anything, but I'm a little bit worried about this 37-year-old guy who is the mayor of South Bend. His name is Pete Buttigieg. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. He is impressive because, frankly, he's normal in a lot of ways. When you actually hear him speak, he doesn't sound crazy. He sounds pretty smart. Now, you might say, well, he's a white man, so obviously he can't win. Yeah, but he's gay. So there's how he wins the intersectional thing. I think if you're gay, it's okay if you're a white man in the Democrat Party, I think. He's younger, so that helps him a little bit, but he's gay. So that they ignore the white man part because he's gay. So and he was a veteran, but what he's trying to do, and he's been getting in the polls a little bit, he's trying to kind of play a little bit of the middle of the road thing. But he has said a couple of interesting things lately that I have to react to. Here is one of them.
This stuff matters, obviously, but we've got to make sure we're talking about, most of the people who cross my path every day in South Bend, Indiana, they may not know or care who Jim Comey is, but they're going to know if their health care gets taken away. This is literally life and death stuff, and so I think we need to communicate about that more. I think that makes for better policy. I think it makes for better politics. I'm actually working to launch a PAC that we're going to call Hitting Home, and the idea is that we need to be talking more about the way these policy things, this show in Washington, actually hits home for regular people. The show is mesmerizing. I get it. I get locked into it, too, when you got the 24/7 stuff. But there are people in our communities right now whose lives are at stake in the healthcare debate, and a whole bunch of other things that are barely getting talked about, because all we can look at is, the latest tweet or whatever craziness is going on, in that kind of echo chamber on Capitol Hill.
So when he's on a debate against all the other Democrats and he's saying things like that, and he was asked about is the Mueller report, and he was on Seth Meyers, late night with Seth Meyers, and he was asked, should the Democrats be focusing so much on Mueller and not on the other stuff? And he's basically saying they should focus more on policy stuff because that's what the everyday American actually cares about. And he's pretty much right. If the Democrats were smart, they would focus more on that stuff.
And I heard him label it called Hitting Home, which is pretty good.
Yeah, There was an article out that says, it was asking this, is Pete Buttigieg a political genius? Because he's trying to play the middle of the road. So he was asked about Chick-fil-A, as a gay man, would you go to Chick-fil-A? And he goes, I don't like a lot of, he says, I don't approve of their politics, but I kind of approve of their chicken, is what he said. That's smart politics. So he's actually a smart guy. Now, he also said something else that I've noticed a lot more Democrats are putting out there. And it's this idea of freedom. What is freedom? He describes it here, and it was trying to put this out there. This is what he said.
I think a lot more people are worried about freedom in the sense of like being able to choose a career without being too bogged down in medical debt or student debt that stops you from, following your dreams versus the freedom to get around some kind of obscure financial regulation, which seems to be the kind of freedom that interests Republicans more. And I think that's part of how, they've really veered away from protecting the freedoms that affect most of us most often in our everyday lives.
So I've noticed this a lot by the Democrats. I remember when Nancy Pelosi was saying this, if we had a more welfare or we had guaranteed health coverage, we would have more freedom in our lives to, do artwork or something. Remember when she was saying, this is something that he's pushing. This is some progressives do, that you should not only have freedom from someone taking away your rights, but you should also have freedom from sacrifice. You shouldn't have to sacrifice. If you have to sacrifice in this world and work hard and actually build wealth and build a career, that takes away freedom to, play. Don't you want to play? So they kind of look at it as freedom. It goes back to what Franklin Delano Roosevelt said when he wanted the new Bill of Rights. We should also have freedom from want, and we should have the right to housing. And they believe that getting all this free stuff from the government is how you really get freedom. Now, of course, that's absurd, because it would never end at that point. And you usually have to limit freedom or take away someone else's freedom to give it to someone else. But there's also something else I noticed he said. What were the two things that he talked about there? Oh, well, freedom from worrying about student loans and freedom from worrying about healthcare costs. Well, gee, how did we get in the problem of those two things in the first place? Too much government intervention in our college system through student loans and too much government intervention in our healthcare system. So a smart person responding to him would say, well, yeah, the reason why those are such a problem is because we had too much government intervention in the first place. And it totally diluted the market in college and diluted the market in healthcare, and that's why we're here. And you think the solution is more government, and that'll give us more freedom. But that's not what freedom really is. So what he's saying there is actually a really big problem. But like I said, and like I said earlier in the show, there's two ways compromise has been in the show today. Fear the compromise by the moderates, because they're going to say these leftist proposals are compromises because they're not as left as some of the others. And then, of course, fear the Democrats constantly saying Trump is compromised. Word of the day, Tom Benson on Beyond Reason Radio. Compromise. So I want to move on something else real quick. So you're talking about the radical left. Buttigieg's strategy is to be more of a bridge builder, more of a uniter, more of someone in the middle. Someone who does not want to build bridges is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, or she has an interesting plan out there behind the scenes that is very, very dangerous, in my opinion. And it was revealed recently when she was talking to the CEO of Wells Fargo in one of these committee hearings and asking him questions. Here's a little bit of what she did, and this laid the groundwork for what some on the radical left want to do. And to me, it's very, very dangerous. Not getting a whole lot of attention, but it should, because this is where they're going. Here it is.
Should Wells Fargo be held responsible for the damages incurred by climate change due to the financing of fossil fuels and these projects?
I don't know how you'd calculate that, Congresswoman.
Say from spills, or when we have to reinvest in infrastructure, building seawalls from the erosion of infrastructure or cleanups, wildfires, etc.
Related to that pipeline? I'm not aware that there's been any of what you described that's occurred related
How
to that
about
pipeline.
the cleanups from the leaks of the Dakota Access Pipeline?
I'm not aware of the leaks associated with the Dakota Access Pipeline that you're describing.
So hypothetically, if there was a leak from the Dakota Access Pipeline, why shouldn't Wells Fargo pay for the cleanup of it since it paid for the construction of the pipeline itself?
Because we don't operate the pipeline. We provide financing to the company that's operating the pipeline. Our responsibility is to ensure that at the time that we make that loan, that customer, and we have a group of people in Wells Fargo, including an environmental oversight group headed by one of my colleagues who used to be at the EPA.
So one question, why did Wells Fargo finance this pipeline when it was widely seen to be environmentally unstable?
So, and she did this on a number of different issues to the CEO of Wells Fargo. Do you understand what she's doing there? This is a new plan by those in the radical left. What she wants to do is pressure banks to not finance things that they disagree with politically.
Intimidation.
It's exactly what it is. It is direct intimidation. You know, there's a great book out by Peter Schweizer called Extortion. And what a lot of these politicians would do in the past is they would put pressure on, say, oil companies. And they would say, why are you doing all this stuff? And we're going to regulate you out of business and all that stuff. And then behind the scenes, they would go, you know, we might let this go if you add some money into my fundraising. You know, people say that Washington is bought by big business. A lot of times, it's the other way around. A lot of times, the politicians extort big business to get their way. But what's happening here, and this is a plan, according to Politico, Ocasio-Cortez says there's more than one way to skin a cat, and not everything has to be done through legislation explicitly. Says we can also use the tools that we have here to pressure change in other ways as well. What they want to do is pressure banks who finance all kinds of things for all kinds of people, because that's what banks do. They usually don't pick these winners and losers with all this stuff. Pressure them not to. So say you are a small business owner and you want to open up a gun shop.
Yes.
They have a plan now to pressure banks to not finance you being able to get a small business loan to open that shop. They want to pressure credit card companies so you can't purchase a gun with a debit card or a credit card. This happened with some books on Amazon, where certain conservative books, there were credit card companies who wouldn't let you buy it on Amazon.
Really?
Because, who was it? Let me say, this was an issue and eventually got turned around because of backlash. But there was a guy, I believe it was, let me look it up here because I have it. Robert Spencer, he wrote a book called The History of Jihad. There was a pressure against him on that book not to be able to get it on Amazon, and the credit card, they didn't want the credit card companies. I think it might have been PayPal or something. I can't remember exactly.
Sure.
To not let you buy that book. Imagine what this would do to our country on so many issues. So because you disagree with someone politically, you can't use banks now. Or if you want to, say, go into the oil business, well, you can't get financing now because you're destroying the planet. So they're trying to, instead of having the government regulate you, they go after the banks so you can't get financing for anything. How dangerous is that? Where does this end? That gives so much power to the government. It's intimidation, and it will just polarize us and split us more. It's awful. It's awful what they're doing. They think they're doing it because they're saving the planet or whatever. But all they are doing is dividing us even more. You want to get us close to a civil war, that's how you do it. It's extremely dangerous. It's happening behind the scenes, and it's going to get more and more. So if you're a conservative, wants to buy a conservative book or sell a conservative book, can't do it. Want to buy a gun, you won't be able to do it. Want to start a small business that, it sells burgers, which kills cows, which, destroys the environment or something. Oh, you won't be able to do it. Maybe they'll go after SeaWorld in the future or something. Who knows what they'll do? It's really bad. It's really dangerous. And it shows AOC, we make fun of her a lot. and we think she's stupid and all that stuff, but she's also really dangerous, some of the stuff she is doing. All right, I think maybe we'll end with a laugh. How about that? We'll have that and more. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Download the iHeart Radio app and catch the Beyond Reason Radio podcast. Your voice of truth in a world of fake news. Beyond Reason Radio continues right now.
So I just saw this story pop up on my Facebook, Tom Benson. We were just talking about AOC, and she apparently was on MSNBC with Chris Hayes earlier.
Okay.
And she said this. She says, I didn't expect them to make total fools of themselves. I expected a little more nuance, and I expected a little more concern trolling. This is her saying that the Republicans made fools of themselves by attacking the Green New Deal. The Republicans made fools of themselves?
Okay.
So you putting out this ridiculous plan was not you making a fool of yourself? And then when you had a chance to encourage people to vote on it, you told them to vote present, and they were the ones making fools of themselves, not you. Okay. Whatever makes you. Even the co-sponsor of the resolution in the Senate voted present.
Correct.
How does that? I can't. It doesn't compute in my head. It's just so dumb. It's so own it. Just own it.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do. All right. It is that time of the show once again. Yes, it is time for things that made Yaffee Laffee. And as usual, it comes with our friends at the Babylon Bee, which I swear sometimes when you read it, it's actually a legit news site.
Yeah.
It seems like it's
especially the headline. You know, it seems like
it is unbelievable.
Is this for real?
Sometimes I wonder. But here's the headline today. Democratic leaders call for new investigation to investigate the investigators investigating the investigators.
That's about right.
See, it could have been real. It says after House Republicans formally called for an investigation into investigators investigating the Trump campaign, congressional Democrats quickly responded by calling for a new investigation into the investigators investigating the original investigators. The investigation will center around claims that the investigators assigned to investigate the investigators may also show significant bias, with the new investigators investigating the investigation, investigators attempting to determine if there has been any prejudice or corruption in the investigation. I'll quote Chuck Schumer here. It says,
oh, of course.
We know who will investigate the investigators, but who will investigate the investigators investigating the investigators? We must hold the investigators investigating the investigation accountable if we are to retain our faith in the justice system. Oh, dear God. That is hilarious. Oh my! I mean, that's kind of like where we're like headed, is it not? I mean, I just... Oh, I don't know. All right, I appreciate you all listening to the show today. Another edition of Beyond Reason Radio in the books. If you happen to miss any of this show, you can go to my website. Just go to WFLAorlando.com, click in the Beyond Reason Radio tab, or just follow the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Beyond Reason Radio, PM Orlando. Follow me on Twitter at PMOWFLA. And you know what? Catch you guys next time.